Please, you have to help him! My brother's
Please
gonna
don't leave
die!
me. The scream shattered the silence of the frozen forest road. Angelico Cremonesi's hands tightened on the steering wheel. 30 years in Boston's underworld had taught him to keep driving when trouble appeared in his headlights. But this wasn't trouble. This was a child. 6 years old, barefoot in the snow, blood trailing behind her with every step. In her trembling arms, she clutched a bundle wrapped in what should have been her own coat. A baby whose lips had turned blue from the cold. When Angelico's SUV slowed to a stop, the girl didn't run. Her legs buckled. Her small body swayed like she'd been walking forever. Then she screamed again with everything left in her broken soul. Please don't leave me. He's dying. My brother's dying. The man who ruled Boston through fear had heard every plea imaginable, begging for mercy, for time, for a quick death instead of a slow one. But he'd never heard a child beg him to stop. His Italian leather shoes hit the snow. The cold bit through his expensive suit. And the most feared man in Boston knelt before a 6-year-old girl who had no idea she'd just chosen the one person in the world who could save her. What Angelico didn't know, what he wouldn't discover until the hospital, was that this desperate child wasn't a stranger. The secret hidden in her blood-stained locket would reveal a truth that had been buried for 10 years. A truth about his lost brother. A truth that would transform a monster into a father. Before we continue, please subscribe to follow this incredible story to the end. Comment below which city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Angelico Cremonesi hadn't built his empire through kindness. Fear, yes. Strategy, absolutely. A reputation for swift, brutal consequences for anyone who crossed him. That was his foundation. Men whispered his name in the shadows of Boston's North End. Rival families knew better than to challenge him. Politicians answered his calls. Judges reconsidered their verdicts. But on this particular December night, driving through a secluded forest road after a meeting that had gone sideways, Angelico wasn't thinking about power or territory or the 1,000 small wars that defined his world. He was thinking about Marco. His younger brother had vanished a decade ago after their worst fight. The night Marco told him he couldn't become what Angelico represented, couldn't turn his soul that dark, couldn't trade his humanity for power. "You're a monster," Marco had said, tears streaming down his face, "and I can't watch you become worse." Angelico had let him go, told himself it was for the best. Marco was weak, unsuited for their world, better off disappeared into whatever ordinary life he'd chosen. But every year that passed without word carved deeper. Every investigation that turned up nothing felt like punishment. 10 years. 10 years of wondering if his brother was alive. 10 years of searching without ever admitting he was searching. Then he saw the flash of red. Angelico's instincts kicked in immediately, trained by decades of surviving in a world where hesitation meant death. Red meant blood. Red meant danger. Red meant something had gone wrong. He slowed the SUV. That's when he saw her. A child stood in the middle of the road, swaying on bare feet that left bloody prints in the fresh snow. She wore what might have been pajamas once. A thin shirt, thin pants, completely inadequate for Boston's brutal winter. But it was what she carried that made Angelico's chest tighten. A bundle wrapped in a red coat. A baby's coat. Except the baby was wearing it. The girl wasn't. She'd given her own coat to the infant in her arms, choosing his warmth over hers, choosing his life over her own comfort. 6 years old, and she'd already learned what sacrifice meant. When Angelico's headlights hit her face, she didn't shield her eyes. She just stared straight into the light like she was staring into salvation or death and had stopped caring which one came. Then her mouth opened. That scream. Raw, desperate, holding nothing back because there was nothing left to hold. "Please don't leave me." The words hit Angelico like a physical blow. He'd heard plenty of desperate pleas in his line of work, but this was different. This wasn't someone begging for their own life. This was a child begging for her brother's. He should have kept driving. Any rational person would have. Call the police. Let them handle it. Stay out of whatever tragedy had unfolded here. He had enough complications in his life without adding more. But Angelico's hand moved to the ignition. Cut the engine. Silence rushed in. Just whined through bare trees and the small, broken sounds of a child trying not to cry. He opened the door. The girl stumbled forward. Her legs gave out halfway. She fell to her knees but kept the bundle clutched against her chest, never letting the baby hit the ground even as her own body collapsed. "Help us!" Her voice was barely a whisper now, all the strength she'd summoned for that scream completely spent. "Please. He's so cold. He won't stop shaking." Angelico moved toward her carefully, the way you approach an injured animal, slow and deliberate so you don't startle them into running. The snow crunched under his shoes. Each step brought him closer to a scene that would haunt him. The girl's feet were torn to shreds, blistered and bleeding from hours of walking barefoot on frozen ground. Her face was pale, not just cold pale but shock pale, the color of someone whose body was starting to shut down. Her eyes, though, those eyes held something Angelico recognized. Absolute refusal to give up. "What's your name?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. "Rose." She had to push the word out through chattering teeth. "Rose Gonzalez. This is Paul. He's my brother. He's only 1 year old and he needs help right now." Angelico knelt in the snow beside her. His expensive suit soaked through immediately. He'd paid more for this suit than most people made in a month, but right now it meant nothing. "Rose, I need to see your brother. Can you let me look at him?" She hesitated. Her arms tightened protectively around the bundle. "I'm not taking him away," Angelico said quietly. "I just need to check him. Then we're all gonna get in my car and go somewhere warm. All 3 of us together. I promise." Something in his voice must have convinced her. Rose's grip loosened slightly. Angelico carefully pulled back the red coat. The baby underneath was gray. Not pink like a healthy infant should be. Gray, with lips tinged blue and breathing so shallow Angelico had to watch carefully to see his chest rise. Hypothermia. Advanced stage. This child was dying. "How long have you been walking?" Angelico asked, already pulling off his suit jacket and wrapping it around both children. "I don't know." Rose's voice was fading, shock finally claiming her. "Mama went to sleep and wouldn't wake up. I tried everything but she wouldn't wake up. So I took Paul and started walking toward the lights through the trees. I thought lights meant people. People who could help." Angelico's blood went cold. Mama went to sleep and wouldn't wake up. He knew what that meant. Had seen it too many times in his world. Overdoses, heart attacks, aneurysms, any of 100 ways people died suddenly without warning. This child had found her mother dead and, instead of panicking, had made the decision to save her brother. "When did this happen, Rose? When did your mama go to sleep?" "I don't. Maybe yesterday? Maybe longer." Her eyes were losing focus. "I kept walking. Had to keep walking. Had to find help for Paul." Angelico scooped them both up in one motion. Child and infant together, surprisingly light, like carrying ghosts. Rose's head fell against his shoulder. She was done fighting now, body finally allowed to collapse now that someone else had taken over. "Sleep if you need to," Angelico said, already moving toward his SUV. "I've got you both. You're safe now. Promise." The word was barely audible. "I promise." He got them into the back seat, cranking the heat to maximum. His phone was in his hand before the door even closed, dialing Dr. Chun, the best pediatric surgeon in Boston, and someone who owed Angelico enough favors to show up anywhere, anytime. "I need you at Boston General's emergency entrance in 15 minutes, Angelico said the moment Chun answered. "Severe hypothermia, infant and child, possible maternal death involved. And Chun, this is priority 1. Drop everything." He hung up before the doctor could respond and called his second lieutenant, Salvatore. "Boss, what? I need you to find an address for Rose and Paul Gonzalez. Check South Boston first, probably within 5 miles of the forest road off Route 28. Look for a woman, mid-30s, possible death in the home within the last 48 hours. Be discreet. Boss is everything. Just do it. Now. Angelico threw the SUV into gear and hit the gas. Boston General Hospital was 20 minutes away. He'd make it in 12. In the rearview mirror, he could see Rose's reflection. She'd passed out completely, her small body finally surrendering to exhaustion. But even unconscious, her arms stayed wrapped around Paul, protecting him even in sleep. Something cracked in Angelico's chest. Something he'd thought was dead and buried with Marco. This child, this stranger's child, had walked through hell on bleeding feet to save her brother. Had given him her own coat knowing she'd freeze. Had screamed for help from a man whose face would terrify most adults. She'd chosen to fight when giving up would have been easier. She'd chosen love over fear. And something about that choice, about her fierce, desperate courage, reminded Angelico of someone. Someone who'd also refused to give up even when the world told him to. Someone who'd believed in protecting the innocent even when it cost him everything. Someone named Marco. The SUV screamed through Boston's empty streets, snow swirling in its wake, carrying 3 people whose lives had just collided in ways none of them could possibly understand yet. Angelico Cremonesi, Boston's most feared criminal, was about to discover that true power had nothing to do with fear or territory or reputation. It had everything to do with the choice a 6-year-old girl made when she refused to leave her brother behind. What would you do if you found a child begging for help in the middle of the night? Would you stop, or would you keep driving? Comment below, because the choice Angelico makes in the next few minutes will change everything he thought he knew about strength, family, and what it means to truly protect someone you love. The emergency room doors burst open before Angelico even killed the engine. Dr. Chun was already there with a trauma team, just like he'd promised. They descended on the SUV like a tactical unit, practiced hands moving with precision that came from saving lives under impossible conditions. Infant first, Chun barked, and someone lifted Paul from Rose's arms. The little girl's eyes snapped open immediately, panic flooding her face. No, don't take him, Rose. Angelico caught her before she could lunge after her brother. They're helping him. That's what we came here for. Remember? She stared at him with eyes that held too much understanding, too much loss. Then she nodded once and let herself be lifted onto a gurney. Angelico watched them disappear through automated doors, his hands still warm from where he'd held them. Blood stained his shirt cuffs, Rose's blood from her torn feet. He looked down at it and felt something shift inside him. When was the last time he'd bled for someone else? Mr. Cremonesi. A hospital administrator appeared, clipboard clutched like a shield. We'll need information. Parents? Guardians? Insurance. Bill me directly for everything. Angelico pulled out his phone. And get me whoever runs your social services department. Those children are not going into the system tonight. The administrator's eyes widened. Everyone in Boston knew who Angelico Cremonesi was, what he was capable of. Sir, there are protocols. I don't care about your protocols. Find me someone with authority. Now. The man scurried away. Angelico sank into a waiting room chair, exhaustion hitting him like a wave. When had he last slept? 2 days ago? 3? His phone buzzed. Salvatore. Found the apartment. South Boston, like you thought. Woman's body on the couch. Looks like she's been gone maybe 2-3 days. Brain aneurysm, probably. Went fast. Angelico closed his eyes. At least Rose's mother hadn't suffered. Boss, there's something else. Found some mail on the counter. Woman's name was Isabella Gonzalez. And married name. Maiden name was Cremonesi. The world stopped. What did you say? Isabella Cremonesi. Married to a Marco Gonzalez about 8 years ago. Marriage certificates in a drawer. And boss. Salvatore's voice dropped. There's a photo on the wall. Guy in the picture? He looks just like you. Younger, softer. But the resemblance is unmistakable. Angelico couldn't breathe. Marco. Isabella had been Marco's wife, which meant Rose and Paul were. His phone slipped from suddenly numb fingers. His brother had been alive all this time, living miles away under a different name. Had built a family, had children, had died without Angelico ever knowing. And now those children, his niece and nephew, were fighting for their lives down the hall. The little girl who'd begged him not to leave wasn't a stranger. She was his blood. Angelico pressed both hands against his face and wept for the brother he'd lost twice and the family he'd found too late. Angelico sat in the ICU waiting room as dawn broke over Boston, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that felt obscene given what was happening inside these walls. Paul was stable, barely but stable. The doctors said another hour in the cold would have killed him. Rose was in the room next door, her feet wrapped in bandages, for fluids running into her small arm. She'd refused to sleep until they let her see Paul through the glass partition. Even now, sedated and exhausted, her hand kept reaching toward the wall that separated them. A nurse appeared with Rose's personal effects in a plastic bag. We had to cut off her clothes. They were ruined anyway, but we saved this. She held up a small golden locket, caked with dirt and blood. Angelico took it carefully. The chain was broken, probably from Rose's fall in the snow. He worked the clasp open, expecting a photo of Isabella, maybe one of the children. Instead, he found himself staring at two boys. One was maybe 16, dark hair slicked back, wearing a cocky grin that screamed trouble. The other was 8, softer, smiling at his older brother like he hung the moon. Angelico's hands began to shake. He knew these boys, had lived with them, had been one of them. The photo was at least 20 years old, taken at their mother's house before she died, before the Cremonese Empire consumed everything, before Angelico became the monster Marco couldn't stand to watch. He turned the locket over. On the back, in their mother's careful handwriting, "My brave boys, always protect each other." The plastic bag slipped from the nurse's hands as Angelico made a sound he didn't recognize. Not quite a sob, not quite a scream. Something in between. Something that came from a place so deep he'd forgotten it existed. "Mr. Cremonese?" The nurse's voice seemed to come from very far away. "Are you all right?" He wasn't all right. Would never be all right again. Because Rose's story suddenly made terrible, perfect sense. Isabella had been Marco's wife. They'd lived quietly in South Boston while Angelico tore the city apart looking for his brother. Marco had been right there, miles away, building the life he'd dreamed of, the normal, peaceful life he'd left the family to find. And then he died. Construction accident, Salvatore had said when he called back with more details. Fell from scaffolding 2 years ago. Isabella had been left alone with 2 babies, and no way to reach out to the Cremonese family. Too proud, maybe, or too afraid. So when her brain aneurysm struck without warning, when she collapsed on that couch and never woke up, there was no one, no family, no safety net, just a 6-year-old girl who understood that screaming wouldn't wake her mother, that calling 911 might mean losing Paul to strangers, that her only chance was to walk until she found help. Rose had carried her brother through miles of frozen forest on bleeding feet because she'd learned what Angelico had forgotten. Family meant sacrifice. Family meant choosing someone else's life over your own comfort. Family meant never, ever giving up. Angelico pressed the locket against his chest and finally understood why Rose had seemed so familiar in the snow. She had Marco's eyes. Richard Walsh cornered Angelico outside the ICU at 7 a.m., flanked by 2 security guards who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. "Mr. Cremonese, we need to discuss the situation with these children." Angelico didn't bother looking up from where he sat, elbows on knees, still holding Rose's locket. "What situation?" My niece and nephew are receiving medical care. That's the only situation I see. Walsh's eyebrows shot up. You're claiming relation to these children? I'm not claiming anything. Rose and Paul Gonzalez are my brother's children. Marco Cremonesi married their mother 8 years ago. He died 2 years back, and now Isabella's gone too. Their blood. Do you have documentation proving this relationship? Angelico finally looked at him. It was the same look that made grown men reconsider their life choices. I have DNA. I have a marriage certificate my people are retrieving from their apartment right now. And I have this. He held up the locket. Family photo. That's me at 16, Marco at 8. Same photo Rose's mother kept all these years. Walsh shifted uncomfortably. Nevertheless, DCF has been contacted. Until custody can be properly determined. Let me save you some time. Angelico stood slowly, deliberately. Those children aren't going anywhere without me. You want to fight that, call your lawyers. I'll have mine here within the hour. But while you're wasting time on bureaucracy, Paul is down to 94% oxygen saturation and Rose hasn't eaten in 3 days. So maybe focus on keeping them alive and let me worry about the rest. The social worker arrived while Dr. Chun was updating Angelico on Paul's condition. Jennifer Martinez was young, maybe 30, with the kind of determined expression that said she'd seen the worst humanity had to offer and stopped being impressed. Mr. Cremonesi. She didn't extend her hand. I'm here to ensure these children's welfare. Good. Make sure they get the best care available. I'm bringing in Dr. Patel from Mass General for a second opinion on Paul's respiratory function. Martinez's jaw tightened. That's not your decision to make. Actually, it is. I'm next of kin. Alleged next of kin. Until proven otherwise, these children are wards of the state. She clutched her tablet like a shield. And given your background, I have serious concerns about placing minors in your care. Angelico's phone buzzed. Salvatore with the documents. Ms. Martinez, I understand you have a job to do. So do I. My job right now is making sure my brother's children survive. Everything else is secondary. Children need stability, safety. They need to live through the next 48 hours. His voice dropped to something cold and final. You want to question my fitness as a guardian? Fine. Do it after Paul's lungs are clear and Rose can walk without crying. Until then, stay out of my way or I'll have every family court judge in Massachusetts on speed dial by lunch. Martinez opened her mouth, then closed it. She'd clearly dealt with difficult relatives before, but Angelico Cremonesi wasn't a relative. He was a different category entirely. I'll be monitoring this situation closely, she said finally. And if I determine these children are at risk, you'll find them safer than they've ever been. That's a promise. After she left, Dr. Chun pulled Angelico aside. You know she's going to make trouble. Let her. All that matters is those kids. Angelico looked through the glass at Rose, finally sleeping. Everything else is just noise. Rose woke at midnight screaming for Paul. The monitors screeched as she tried to rip out her small hands clawing at the tubes connecting her to machines that beeped urgent warnings. Paul! Where's Paul? You promised you wouldn't take him. Angelico was at her bedside in seconds, catching her wrists before she could hurt herself. Rose, stop. He's right here. Look. He turned her gently toward the glass partition. Through it, Paul lay in his isolette, chest rising and falling with the help of oxygen, but alive, breathing, fighting. Rose went limp in Angelico's hands, tears streaming down her face. He's okay? He's okay. Getting stronger every hour. Angelico eased her back onto the pillows. The doctors say he's going to make it. Rose, you saved him. I didn't save him. You did. Her voice was barely a whisper. You stopped when everyone else kept driving. Something twisted in Angelico's chest. He thought about all the cars that must have passed her on that road. All the people who saw a struggling child and decided it wasn't their problem. He'd spent decades being one of those people, the kind who looked away, who kept moving, who protected themselves by refusing to care. Until tonight. Rose, I need to tell you something. He pulled up a chair, sitting so they were eye level. Your mama's name was Isabella, right? She nodded, fresh tears welling up. And your papa, what was his name? Papa's name was Marco. Rose's voice broke on the word. He died when I was 4. Fell from a building where he was working. Mama said he was the bravest man she ever knew because he left his scary family to keep us safe. Angelico's throat closed. Scary family. That's what Marco had told Isabella. That's why they'd stayed hidden all these years. Rose, do you know what your papa's last name was? Before he married your mama. She shook her head. Mama said we didn't talk about before. Only about now and after. Angelico pulled out the locket, now cleaned, the gold shining under the hospital lights. The nurses found this on you. Do you know what's inside? That's Mama's special locket. She never took it off. Rose reached for it with trembling fingers. She said it had her 2 favorite boys. Open it. Rose worked the clasp with difficulty, her bandaged hands making the small mechanism hard to manipulate. When it finally clicked open, she stared at the photograph for a long moment. That's you, she said, pointing to the teenage boy. Then her finger moved to the younger child. And that looks like the picture Mama had of Papa when he was little. It is your Papa. And that's me when I was 16. Angelico had to force the words out. Your Papa was my little brother, Rose. Marco Cremonesi. Which means you and Paul, you're my family. You've been my family this whole time, and I didn't know. Rose stared at him with those eyes, Marco's eyes, processing information too big for a 6-year-old to fully comprehend. You're my uncle? Yeah, piccola. I'm your uncle. She looked at the locket, then at Paul through the glass, then back at Angelico. Is that why you stopped? Because you knew? No. I stopped because a brave little girl asked me to. His voice cracked. I just didn't know I was stopping for family. Rose launched herself into his arms, wrapping her small body around him like she was afraid he'd disappear. Angelico held her while she sobbed. This child who'd lost everything but refused to lose her brother, and finally let himself feel the full weight of everything that had been stolen from them both. Salvatore brought the box to the hospital at 3 in the morning. Angelico had sent him back to the apartment with specific instructions. Bring everything personal. Photos, documents, letters. Anything that might tell him about the life Marco had built in the years they'd been apart. Boss, you should prepare yourself. Salvatore set the cardboard box on the waiting room table. It's complicated. Angelico opened it slowly. On top was a photo album showing Marco and Isabella's wedding day, then Rose's birth, then Paul's arrival. A family Marco had built in secret, just miles from where Angelico operated. Beneath the photos were bills, medical expenses, past due rent notices, collection letters. Isabella had been struggling financially, working multiple jobs to keep the family afloat. Then Salvatore pulled out an envelope marked urgent for Marco. Boss, this was on the kitchen counter. It's from his construction company in Maine. He's been working up there for the past 2 months on a highway project. Storm delayed his return. He was supposed to come home 3 days ago. Angelico's hands went numb. He doesn't know. No, sir. His phone's been off. Probably dead battery or no service in the storm. We tracked down his crew foreman. Marco's on his way back now. Should arrive in Boston tomorrow morning. The weight of it crashed over Angelico. His brother was alive. Had been alive this whole time, building a quiet life away from the family business, away from the violence. And now Marco was driving home to discover his wife was dead, and his children had almost died in the snow. Find him, Angelico said quietly. Intercept him before he gets to the apartment. Bring him here. I need to tell him face to face. But there was something else in the box, a shoebox filled with letters. Letters from Isabella to Angelico, never sent. Dozens of them spanning 6 years. He opened the first one, dated just after Rose's birth. Dear Angelico, Marco asked me not to write this, but I'm doing it anyway. You have a niece. Her name is Rosemarie, and she has your eyes. Marco talks about you sometimes, late at night when he thinks I'm sleeping. Says you used to protect him when you were kids. He misses you. Won't admit it, but he does. Angelico opened another, then another. Each one a window into the life Marco had lived. The struggles, the joys, the constant presence of love for the brother he'd left behind. The final letter, dated 1 week before Isabella's death, was only half finished. Angelico, Marco's been talking about reaching out. Says maybe it's time to let the past be past. Rose asks about her uncle sometimes, the one in Mama's locket. I think Marco's ready. I think we all are. When he gets back from Maine, we're gonna call you. We're gonna try. The letter ended there. Isabella had died before she could finish it. Before she could make that call. Before the reconciliation she'd spent years hoping for could happen. Angelico pressed the letters against his chest and wept for the sister-in-law he'd never met, for the brother who'd been ready to forgive, for the decade they'd lost to pride and fear. Tomorrow Marco would arrive. Tomorrow the brothers would face each other after 10 years of silence. Tomorrow everything would change again. But tonight, Angelico sat with Isabella's words and finally understood what Marco had been trying to tell him all those years ago. Family wasn't about power or control or the empire you built. It was about the people you protected, the children you raised, the love you chose over everything else. The emergency custody hearing happened 72 hours after Angelico found the children. Jennifer Martinez sat across from him in Judge Catherine Morrison's chambers, armed with a file thick enough to stop a bullet. Your Honor, Mr. Cremonesi's criminal associations make him fundamentally unsuitable as a guardian. These children have suffered enough trauma without being exposed to. To what exactly? Angelico's lawyer, David Chun, no relation to the doctor, cut her off smoothly. My client has never been convicted of a violent crime. He's a successful businessman with substantial resources and, most importantly, he's the children's biological uncle. DNA tests confirm it. He slid the lab results across the judge's desk. Morrison studied them carefully, her expression unreadable. Martinez shifted tactics. Blood relation doesn't guarantee fitness. The lifestyle Mr. Cremonesi leads has included 15 years of anonymous donations to St. Anthony's Food Bank. David interrupted again. Father Dominic Caruso is waiting outside to testify, along with Dr. Sarah Chan, who can speak to Mr. Cremonesi's immediate response in saving these children's lives, and Detective James Sullivan from Boston PD, who, a detective is supporting this? Martinez's voice rose slightly. Detective Sullivan worked with my client on 3 separate occasions to recover missing children from trafficking rings. Mr. Cremonesi's network proved invaluable in locating victims when traditional law enforcement methods failed. Judge Morrison looked at Angelico directly. Mr. Cremonesi, why do you want custody of these children? Everyone in the room held their breath. Angelico had prepared for this question, had rehearsed answers with David. But sitting here, with Rose's locket in his pocket and Marco's letters burned into his memory, the rehearsed words felt hollow. My brother left because he was scared of who I was becoming. He was right to be scared. I turned into something he couldn't recognize, something that made him choose poverty and struggle over staying near me. Angelico's voice stayed steady, but his hands trembled slightly. He spent 8 years trying to give his children a better life than the one we grew up in. And he succeeded. Rose and Paul knew love, knew safety, knew what it meant to be protected. Then everything fell apart, and I wasn't there to catch them. He pulled out the locket. This is the only thing Rose had left when I found her. A photo of me and Marco before everything went wrong. My brother kept this picture all those years. Let his wife wear it. Let his daughter carry it into the snow when she was dying. Maybe he remembered who I used to be before I became what I am now. Maybe he hoped I could be that person again. Angelico met the judge's eyes. I can't bring Marco back. Can't undo the years we lost. But I can keep his children safe. Can make sure they grow up knowing they're loved, knowing they're protected, knowing they're wanted. That's what my brother would have done if our positions were reversed. That's what family means. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Morrison spoke. I'm granting temporary custody to Mr. Cremonesi, pending home studies and continued evaluation. Ms. Martinez, you'll conduct monthly reviews for the next 6 months. Outside the courthouse, Salvatore was waiting with his phone pressed to his ear, his face grim. Boss, we've got a problem. Vittorio Marchetti just put out word he wants a meeting. Says you've gone soft, that the children make you vulnerable. His people have been asking questions about Rose and Paul's schedule, their security protocols. Angelico's blood went cold. Vittorio ran the North End, had been looking for an excuse to challenge Angelico's territory since last summer. And now he'd found one. Set up the meeting, Angelico said quietly. But make it clear, anyone who touches my family doesn't get a second chance. The attempt came on Rose's 8th day in the hospital. 2 men in hospital scrubs, badges that looked legitimate until you checked them closely, walking toward the pediatric ward with purpose that set off every alarm in Salvatore's instincts. He intercepted them at the elevator. Can I help you, gentlemen? Transferring a patient to Mass General, the taller one said, his accent all wrong for Boston, New York, maybe Brooklyn. Gonzalez kids. Salvatore's hand moved to his jacket. Nobody's transferring anywhere without Mr. Cremonesi's authorization. The men exchanged glances. The shorter one's hand twitched toward his waistband. That's when hospital security appeared. 6 of Angelico's people dressed as guards, surrounding the would-be kidnappers before they could draw weapons. Tell Vittorio he just made the biggest mistake of his life, Salvatore said quietly. The warehouse on the docks was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into bones and stays there. Vittorio Marchetti arrived with 4 soldiers, walking into the building like he owned it. Maybe he thought he did. The North End had been his territory for 20 years. He was about to learn territory meant nothing. Angelico stood in the center of the empty space, alone, his hands clasped behind his back. Vittorio smiled, the smile of a predator who thinks he's cornered wounded prey. Cremonesi, heard you've become a family man. How domestic. You sent men to take my niece and nephew from a hospital. Angelico's voice was conversational, almost pleasant. That's how you knew he was truly dangerous. Want to explain that decision? Just wanted to talk. Send a message. You've gone soft, Angelico. Everyone sees it. Spending your nights in pediatric wards instead of protecting your interests? That's weakness.
Vittorio stepped closer.
And weakness in our world gets exploited. You're right about one thing. I have changed. Angelico nodded slowly. Used to be, someone challenged me, I'd respond with overwhelming force. Burn down their operations, destroy their families, make examples that lasted generations. The warehouse doors slammed open. 30 men poured in, surrounding Vittorio and his soldiers. Not Angelico's usual crew. These were representatives from every family in New England. The Russos from Providence. The Catalanos from Connecticut. Even the Giordanos from New York, who rarely involved themselves in Boston politics. Vittorio's face went pale. Called in some favors, Angelico said. See, I wanted witnesses for this. Wanted everyone to hear what I'm about to say, so there's no confusion later. He turned to address the assembled crowd. My niece and nephew are off limits. Not just to Vittorio, to everyone. Any conflict, any war, any business dispute, it ends before it touches them. That's not negotiable. You can't just declare, Vittorio started. I can. I am. And anyone who disagrees can take it up with me directly. Angelico's voice dropped to something cold and final. But understand this. I've spent 30 years building my reputation on controlled violence, calculated responses, strategic thinking. That ends the moment someone threatens those children. You come after Rose or Paul, what happens next won't be business. It'll be biblical. Salvatore appeared at Angelico's shoulder, his face troubled. Boss, some of our own people are questioning this. They're saying, I know what they're saying. Angelico turned to face his lieutenant. They think I'm choosing 2 kids over the family that supported me for decades. Want to know what I told them? What? Rose and Paul are my family. Everything else. He gestured around the warehouse. This is just business. Always has been. Salvatore stared at him for a long moment. Then slowly he smiled. Marco would be proud of you, boss. The words hit harder than any bullet could have. Angelico felt something crack in his chest. Something that had been frozen since the night his brother walked away. Get Vittorio out of my city, he said quietly, and send word to everyone else. The rules just changed. The final custody hearing took place 6 weeks after Angelico found the children in the snow. The courtroom was packed. Media in the back rows, social workers taking notes, lawyers on both sides preparing for war. Rose sat in the front row between Salvatore and Dr. Chun, her feet still wrapped in bandages but healing. Paul was with a nurse in the hallway, too young to understand what was happening but healthy enough to leave the hospital at last. The prosecution went first. Assistant District Attorney Michael Brennan stood with the confidence of someone who'd never lost a case involving organized crime figures. Your Honor, the state's position is clear. Angelico Cremonesi, despite his biological connection to these children, operates at the center of Boston's criminal underworld. His business associates include known felons. His properties have been under investigation for money laundering. His very name inspires fear in. Objection. David Chin rose smoothly. Mr. Brennan is giving a campaign speech, not presenting evidence. My client has never been convicted of a crime. The investigations he mentions have produced no charges. And his name inspires fear primarily in people who prey on the vulnerable, which, given these children's circumstances, seems like an asset rather than a liability. Judge Morrison's eyes flicked between the lawyers. I'll allow it, but Mr. Brennan, stick to facts. Brennan nodded and continued for another 20 minutes, painting Angelico as everything society feared. Powerful, connected, operating outside the law's reach. He wasn't wrong exactly. He just wasn't telling the whole truth. Then it was David's turn. He called Father Dominic first, who testified about Angelico's quiet generosity. Then Dr. Chun, who described the immediate, decisive action that saved Paul's life. Then Detective Sullivan, who admitted under oath that Angelico's network had helped recover 8 missing children in the past 5 years. But none of that mattered as much as what happened next. Your Honor, Rose's small voice cut through the murmurs. Can I say something? The courtroom fell silent. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Young lady, you don't have to speak if you don't want to. I want to. Rose stood up, her legs shaking slightly but her voice steady. Everyone keeps talking about Uncle Angelico like they know him, but they weren't there. She walked to the front of the courtroom, and Angelico's heart clenched. This brave, fierce child who'd walked through hell to save her brother was about to walk through another kind of fire for him. I was dying in the snow. Paul was dying. And cars kept passing us. I counted them. 7 cars saw us and kept driving. Rose's voice grew stronger. But Uncle Angelico stopped. He didn't know we were family. He just heard me screaming and he stopped. She turned to face the packed courtroom. He carried us to his car even though we were dirty and bloody, and I bit him when I got scared. He drove so fast to the hospital I thought we were flying. He held my hand while the doctors worked on Paul, and when I woke up crying, he was still there. He's been there every single day since. Rose looked directly at Judge Morrison. The bad men in suits keep saying he's dangerous. Maybe he is to bad people. But he's not dangerous to me and Paul. He makes us feel safe. And Mama's locket had his picture in it, which means she trusted him too. So why can't you? The courtroom erupted in whispers. Judge Morrison banged her gavel for silence, then looked at Angelico. Mr. Cremonesi, I have one question. Can you promise this court that these children will be your priority? Above business, above territory, above everything else. Angelico stood. Your Honor, 6 weeks ago I thought I had nothing left to protect. Then a 6-year-old girl begged me not to leave, and I realized I'd been protecting the wrong things my whole life. His voice steadied. Rose and Paul are my priority now. They're all that matters. Everything else is just noise. Judge Morrison studied him for what felt like forever. Then she spoke. Custody granted. Rose's scream of joy echoed through the courthouse. The December snow fell exactly the way it had 1 year ago. Thick, silent, transforming the world into something clean and new. Angelico's SUV moved slowly down the forest road, Rose in the passenger seat, Paul strapped into his car seat behind them, babbling happily to the stuffed bear Rose had carried through the desert of her trauma. Are we almost there? Rose asked, her breath fogging the window as she pressed her face against the glass. Almost, Piccola. The past 6 months had changed everything. The fortress on Beacon Hill that once echoed with the footsteps of soldiers now rang with children's laughter. Rose's artwork covered the refrigerator, crayon drawings of their new family, always with 3 figures holding hands. Paul had taken his first steps last Tuesday, stumbling toward Angelico with the fearless determination he'd inherited from his sister. And Marco, the golden retriever puppy Rose had insisted on naming after her father, left toys scattered across floors that used to gleam with hostile perfection. Angelico had restructured his entire operation. Salvatore handled the day-to-day business now. The meetings happened without him. The wars resolved themselves through intermediaries, because at 3 p.m. every day, Angelico left everything behind to pick Rose up from school. At 6 p.m., he read Paul his bedtime story. At 8 p.m., he tucked Rose in and listened to her process her nightmares with the therapist's tools she was learning to use. He'd spent 30 years building an empire. Turned out the only thing worth ruling was a home where children felt safe. The memorial came into view. A simple stone marker Angelico had commissioned from the finest craftsman in Boston. Rose gasped and pressed both hands against the window. It's beautiful, Uncle Angelico. Just Angelico now, remember? Or, he paused, suddenly uncertain. They'd never actually discussed what Rose should call him. They parked and walked to the marker together. Paul bundled in Angelico's arms, Rose holding his hand. The inscription was exactly as Angelico had requested. Marco and Isabella Cremonesi. You raised a daughter brave enough to save her brother. You raised a son I'm honored to remember. Your children will know your love through every day I have left. Rose read it slowly, her lips moving over each word. When she finished, tears streamed down her cheeks. Do you think they can see us? She whispered. Yeah, piccola. I think they can. Do you think they're proud? Angelico knelt in the snow, setting Paul down carefully beside him. I think your mama and papa are so proud of you they can barely stand it. You saved your brother. You survived things no child should face. You learned to trust again when you had every reason not to. Rose threw her arms around his neck. I couldn't have done it without you. We saved each other, remember? They stood in the falling snow, the 3 of them, at the spot where everything changed. Then Rose pulled back and looked at him with those eyes. Marco's eyes, filled with a question she'd been holding for months. Uncle Angelico, can I ask you something? Anything. Mama and Papa are gone. They'll always be my first Mama and Papa, and I'll never forget them. She took a shaky breath. But you take care of us now. You read stories and make breakfast and check for monsters under my bed. You're the one who's here. She paused, and Angelico's heart hammered against his ribs. Are you our Papa now? Like, our real Papa? The question broke him open. This child who'd lost everything, asking if she could claim him as family, asking if the monster who'd ruled through fear could become the father she deserved. Angelico pulled both children close, Rose in one arm, Paul in the other, and let the tears come. "I'm your papa, Rose, forever and always. Both of you, you're mine, and I'm yours, and nothing in this world will ever change that." Rose buried her face in his shoulder. "Promise. I promise." They stayed at the memorial until the snow covered them like a blessing. Then headlights appeared on the forest road. A truck Angelico recognized immediately. Marco stepped out, his face weathered by 10 years of construction, work, and loss. But his eyes still carried the warmth Angelico remembered from childhood. Rose saw him and screamed, "Papa!" launching herself across the snow. Marco caught her, then grabbed Paul, then stood there holding his children while tears streamed down his face. He looked over their heads at Angelico, and something passed between the brothers. Grief for what they'd lost, gratitude for what remained. "Thank you," Marco said, his voice breaking, "for stopping, for saving them." "They saved me," Angelico replied. Then, quieter, "I'm sorry, Marco, for everything, for who I became, for the years we lost." Marco shifted Paul to one arm and extended his hand to his brother. "We're here now. That's what matters." Angelico took his hand, then pulled him into an embrace. Two brothers reunited over the children who'd brought them back together. Rose looked up at them both. "Are we a family again?" Marco and Angelico answered together, "We never stopped being one." And in the falling snow, at the spot where everything had shattered and rebuilt itself, the Cremonesi family was finally whole. True strength is not measured by the power you hold over others, but by the sacrifices you make to protect the vulnerable. Angelico Cremonesi learned that the empire he built through fear was meaningless compared to the family he gained through compassion. Sometimes, the person you stop to rescue is the one who ends up saving your soul. In your daily life, remember that a single act of kindness, stopping when others pass by, caring when others look away, can change not just one destiny, but your own. The most feared man in Boston discovered he was always searching for what he found on that snowy forest road. The courage to be more than his past, the strength to choose love over power, and the family that proved he was never beyond redemption. The man who'd spent 30 years running from his past finally stopped running. Not because he found peace, but because two children reminded him that the greatest strength isn't in conquering your enemies, it's in protecting those who can't protect themselves. If this story showed you that it's never too late to choose love over fear, that one moment of stopping instead of passing by can change everything, subscribe and share where you're watching from. Because the world needs more people who stop when others keep driving, who see the vulnerable and choose to protect instead of ignore. Rose taught us that bravery isn't about being unafraid, it's about being terrified and fighting anyway. Angelico learned that redemption doesn't come from power or territory, but from the moment you kneel in the snow and promise a child you'll never leave. The question is, when you hear someone crying for help, will you stop, or will you keep driving? Your answer to that question defines who you really are. Comment below and tell me, have you ever stopped for someone when everyone else passed by? I want to hear your stories.